Good morning. I'm Mary Glasgow Brown, and I'll be speaking to you today on effectiveness of weighted blankets in pediatric practice. And I'm presenting on behalf of occupational therapist at BC Children's Hospital, and Miranda Doherty, myself, Courtney Hall, Sue Kozak, Sarah James, Jen Moritz, Yvonne Montgomery, as well as UBC OT student Ali Zwicker. I would especially like to thank Yvonne for the guidance she's given in this, and Sarah James for the initial structure to this presentation. There we go. I'm going to talk about a literature review that we did, appraising the evidence we found in that lit review, discussing some findings, as well as position statements and clinical applications. I have no biases to report. I am grateful to you to be speaking to you from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish nations, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. A little bit of background on weighted blankets. So they're pretty new to the public in terms of how long they've been sold in stores, in mainstream stores, but occupational therapists have been using weighted blankets for emotional and physical regulation for quite a bit longer than that. But we still need to know, are they effective? Should they be recommended to clients? Which outcomes are best supported? And I would also say, are they safe? Some of you may remember that a number of years ago, there was a child in Ontario who died while using a weighted blanket. So that adds to my question as well. We start with a clinical question using the PICO structure. Population is school-age children with autism. Intervention is weighted blanket. We have no comparison. Improved sleep or improved self-regulation are the outcomes. We searched the evidence using TRIP database, CINAHL, Medline, Google Scholar, using a number of different search terms. And we found the best evidence we found was the systematic review published last year through the American Journal of Occupational Therapy by Aaron et al., weighted blanket use. Now, where does that fit in terms of the evidence? Looking at the 6S model, it is not quite halfway up or around halfway, about S4, systematic review. What were the findings? So in this systematic review, there were 8 different articles included. 5 were with adults and 3 were with children. The ones with children, there was 3 of them. The first 2 were fairly small and had first had inconclusive findings for attention behavior. The second one had some evidence for sleep and no change in morning mood. The third one was quite a bit larger, but no change in sleep quality, and parents perceived children were calmer and that their sleep was improved with the weighted blanket. So a little bit of difference there. How do we appraise this evidence? It fits in at about level 3, cohort studies. And we look at using AMSTAR to appraise the quality of the evidence. And it received 5 out of 11. So there were some things that were well done, and there were other areas that could be improved. So again, to summarize these studies, with the adult studies, findings for anxiety in adults are promising but weak, and to a lesser extent for sleep disturbances. In pediatric studies, inconclusive findings for children with autism, for attention, behavior, and sleep, despite some favorable subjective reports. Now, how do we apply this clinically? So weighted blankets are clinically relevant for children with autism, but it can't be generalized to other populations. Weighted blankets are feasible, and they're easy to implement at home, and they're fairly affordable, but caregivers really must be aware of proper usage and safety precautions. So now we look at using the traffic light system. Where does this fall into place? Red being, I'll just go back. Red being stop in an ineffective intervention, according to evidence. Green being, yes, this is fantastic, full steam ahead. And yellow being proceed with caution. And that's where weighted blankets lie, according to this evidence, is that proceed with caution. It's a systematic review that we're looking at, level 3 evidence rating. Quality is 5 out of 11, lands us at yellow. And that is because, as we said, limited populations, limited outcomes. The clinical bottom line is really that we need to use weighted blankets with cautions and caregivers need to be aware of those proper usages and safety precautions. So then we continued on. Okay, so this is what the evidence has to say. What about position statements? What's available there? And COT has a position statement, as well as Alberta and Quebec as well. And this is what they say, is that really caregivers must consent specifically. So it's no surprise. Weighted blankets should never be used as a restraint. Children's head and neck must be free at all times. And kids need to be able to free themselves from weighted blankets. That's in keeping with safe sleep guidelines as well. Weighted blankets should be used under close supervision by someone who's been trained. Children must never be left unsupervised, and except in exceptional circumstances, the cover should only be used for 20 consecutive minutes. And I'm not sure how that fits with that third study that had all the children and talked about sleep quality. So that's a question I have. Broader findings to continue is that the weight and the size of the child should be appropriate, of the blanket should be appropriate to the size of the child. 10% of the child's weight is the limit recommended. So if you've got a child who's 40 pounds, the blanket should be no more than 4 pounds. And really documented protocols should be set up for the use and specific instructions given to families and caregivers. You also need to consider what are some contraindications: breathing problems, cardiac problems, epilepsy, hypertonia, serious hypertonia, skin problems, and circulation problems. When to discontinue their use, if there's difficulty breathing, nausea, increase in body temperature, muscle fatigue, skin irritation, discomfort, anxiety, changes to orientation or arousal level. Although that being said, I often consider weighted blankets or something that might help bring arousal levels down. But if it is beyond, if it's taking a child outside of that comfort level, or that where we want them to be. So what kind of recommendations do we have for change? Use a measurement. Here are some outcome measures that you could consider. Questionnaires on self-regulation or anxiety. Could use a sensory equipment tracking sheet. Really making sure that you have a thoughtful and cautious prescription, because the evidence is just not quite there yet. More frequent and consistent use of outcome measures to evaluate effectiveness, and providing thorough education for caregivers. You can use passive knowledge translation methods such as written materials, caregiver handouts, healthcare professionals, or more active education meetings with quiet Q&A time or interprofessional education. We have put together a caregiver handout. You could also consider healthcare professional handouts. This is the one that we've sent out to you. You're welcome to use it and to share it. And in conclusion, weighted blankets are increasingly mainstream. People like them, but there's not actually clear evidence as to their utility. Inconclusive findings to date for use in pediatrics for children with autism to improve attention and behavior and sleep outcomes. There are no guidelines for use of weighted blankets. However, position statements provide some guidance, which is really important in terms of considering that safety. Current guidance is that weighted blankets should be used for a maximum of 20 minutes during the day, not recommended for overnight use, and really that 10% of the child's weight. Therapists must provide education to families. Outcome measures are needed to determine individual effectiveness. Guidelines should be developed and updated as more evidence becomes available. Further research is required with various pediatric populations and more rigorous study designs. References available here. And thank you. And I'm hoping we have some time for questions.